Well, when it rains, it pours. Oh dear. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Discourse Education podcast, where we cover, current affairs, break it down, and pitch it at a level to help students in Singapore, offering general paper in the A levels to better understand all these ongoing salient issues, and also to use them as examples in their essays. Well, yeah, so I just realized we are currently at episode 6, and I haven't really introduced myself. In fact, not at all. I just realized I made the same mistake for my usual lessons. Oh my god. Okay. Right. So welcome to the podcast. My name is Chang, and I'm the general paper H2 history and secondary school English teacher at the Discourse Education, which is a tuition service, offering all these lessons for Singaporean students. Basically it's a test preparation and tutoring service to get them through their A levels. But of course, we don't just get students in, drill them on their coursework and then all that. No, we try and make things, a little bit more interesting, of course, in our usual lessons. But yeah, that's that. And yeah, so this week's episode is a little bit late because we have been, or rather I, because just to let you know, the Discourse Education currently is still basically a one-man show here. We have been busy preparing our usual lessons, coming out with lesson plans and all that for our paying students. So hey, as much as we would like to add a little bit more value, by putting out free content every week, I'm gonna prioritize students who actually pay for my time. That's just the nature of the business. So nevertheless, we're back. And yeah, this week is a doozy. So here we go. So this news broke last week when we stopped the recording, right? And as you can see here, we have a new setup. We are trying some things, at low cost or even no cost. And yeah, hopefully the presentation is much better on that front. And you guys can better understand what is it that we are trying to talk about. I'm still trying to work on my presentation skills, definitely, because I started not quite a bit when I was a kid, and currently still kind of trying to get the thoughts flowing. Yeah, so well, here we go. Right, so yeah, once we hit stop record last week, during our at the end of last week's episode, the news came out that our previous transport minister in Singapore, S. Iswaran, was charged, or rather to be more specific, charged with 27 charges essentially, right? Of the gist of it is corruption. Okay, and obviously he has pled not guilty. And upon the meeting out of the charges, he has since resigned, and if I remember correctly, returned all the back pay that he received, as a suspended minister ever since, as he got suspended last year when the investigation was officially opened, and he was living on an allowance of, I think, 8,000 a month, if I'm not wrong. Do fact check that. And all those back pay, all those back allowance, he has since returned them. So just some details here, right? We know now that he has allegedly, received, or rather, accepted certain bribes, I guess, to put it simply. And as you can see here in this CNA news article, there is a list of a whole bunch of things, right? So 2 tickets to the show Thriller, right, from Mr. Ong Beng Seng. So Mr. Ong Beng Seng is the other guy. He's not a minister, but he's a businessman who has been implicated in this entire scandal. And yeah, so the central two figures in this whole case would be Mr. Iswaran and Mr. Ong Beng Seng. And Mr. Iswaran allegedly received, these 2 tickets to the show Thriller. Show, what show is this? I'm not really sure. Perhaps it's a musical about Michael Jackson. I'm not too sure about that. Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Amazing book. I would recommend checking it out. Yes, it basically is written from the perspective of an autistic teenager, right, who was taking A levels, and it's based in the UK. Very, very interesting book. It explores, a lot of the, I guess, the degradation of the familial unit in suburban and urban UK. It's a very interesting book, and he apparently received, or allegedly rather, received 2 tickets to that. And then, of course, various tickets to various football matches. West Ham versus Everton. Okay. Arsenal versus Tottenham Hotspur at versus the Spurs at Emirates Stadium. And of course, the Singapore Grand Prix, right, in 2016, 2017, boardwalk tickets, green room tickets, allegedly. Again, can't stress that enough. Another show, Book of Mormon, right? Chelsea, or another football match, Chelsea versus Southampton, and of course, the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. So yeah, all that, and again, Arsenal versus Liverpool, and a whole bunch of things essentially, right? And the total amount that was allegedly received, if I remember my facts correctly, is it stands at over 300 plus thousand Sing dollars. And yeah, that's the gist of it, right? Of course, court proceedings are still continuing. We are still following, the story is still unfolding, and we are still following that. And yeah, it's essentially one of the I guess highest profile corruption case since, well, decades ago. So yeah, pretty sure in Singapore many GP teachers have been talking about this, right? Because obviously it's such a huge example with huge implications, and not just GP, I guess, SS teachers as well. So let's break it down over here. Now, I think the biggest takeaway for this particular case really is a question of optics. All right. So, what do we mean by a question of optics? Okay. So, if let's say we just, let's head over to our whiteboard here, which is really just, a Microsoft Word document. Right, here we go. So, when we talk about the optics of something, essentially what that means is how things may be perceived by the public. All right. So, for instance, okay, we are taught essentially, there's this age-old truism, I guess, which is you never judge a book by its cover, right? Whatever something looks like, you gotta look beyond the exterior looks and the superficial looks and all that to really go and understand what's beneath, whatever that is, right? But the thing is that when it comes to politics, optics really matter, all right? And that really has a lot to do with the votes and the electorate, i.e. the people voting for all these leaders, right? So the optics of this situation is obviously not good. People generally have a very negative perception of this whole scandal. Of course, we don't know for sure whether or not there is sufficient evidence to demonstrate, beyond reasonable doubt, which just means sufficient evidence to conclusively prove that Mr. Iswaran and Mr. Ong Beng Seng were corrupt, right? Because, as I said, the court trials are still going on. But it doesn't look good, right? It doesn't look good, especially for, a political party, the ruling party, PAP in Singapore, priding itself so much on its yeah, my tongue is not working well today. Priding itself so much on its incorruptibility, right? I mean, that symbolism is very clear, down to the T of how they dress themselves and present themselves. That's why you see in political campaigns, they often dress, or rather, the PAP uniform is a full white uniform. So, white polo tee typically, and white, slacks or white trousers in general. And the white color it basically is meant to symbolize incorruptibility on their part. And then, of course, you have one of the top ministers at that, holding a very key position, the ex-minister of transport. Obviously, now the current minister of transport, if I'm not wrong, is Mr. Chee Hong Tat, right? And this transport minister being allegedly involved in this whole case of corruption. So, from the optics side of it, obviously, a lot of Singaporeans are gonna question a lot of things, right? How could something like this even occur, right, under the nose of the rest of cabinet? And of course, the optics on the political party itself. So, to paint some context, and I guess in this particular case, we are looking at it in terms of the impacts on the PAP's elections chances, right? And not to say that I agree with all the sentiments that have been raised in recent days or recent years, I guess. Just gotta plug in my phone because it's acting as my webcam and it's running. You know what? Never mind. So the context here is that, number one, the PAP as a whole, ever since 2011, right, it has been fighting off this image of, and I'm not saying that I agree with this, fighting off the image, or I guess the negative perception of elitism, right? The basic gist of it is that, when and they use these terms themselves. PM Lee, he himself said this in the watershed 2011 elections, when there was just this unprecedented amount of opposition to PAP leadership. That stems from, a lot of, I guess, unhappiness with the way that the PAP has been communicating many of the issues, and again, what some people perceive as a very blasé sort of attitude towards the bread and butter issues that are plaguing Singaporeans in general. So back in 2011, for some context, that was related to things like access to CPF, the public transport infrastructure, so on and so forth. Today, though, the PAP, at least for those who vehemently, oppose the ruling party, just to make my stance clear, I neither support nor oppose the PAP. What I support is good policy, right? So, but for those who vehemently oppose the PAP, they see it as essentially a bunch of leaders in their ivory towers. And again, I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, but yeah, and when you have such a thing occurring, it raises, or rather, it opens a can of worms into various issues. So the first one, as I said here, being fighting off the image of elitism. Secondly, it is also related to things like the ministerial pay. So this is a very sore point, I guess, for many of the opposition against the PAP, right? For a long time now. And the idea is that, if we look at this particular part here, right? The idea, simply put, is that ministerial salaries are simply way too high for public servants, and again, whether or not this is the right move, I'm not here to commentate on that. I have my personal opinions. I'm not going to delve into them here. I'm just simply pointing out what people feel, and of course, based on this particular article, where the numbers, I can't really find it. Okay, there we go. Right. So, according to the government themselves, right, an entry-level minister's pay stands at 1.2 million Sing dollars. So that rounds up roughly to about $100,000 per month. Of course, that's if I'm not wrong, before taxes and of course already including the 13th month bonus and all these other bonuses, right? Assuming that their KPIs are met and all that. And the main justification that the government, or the main justifications the government has been giving out for quite some time now, is that we want to have high ministerial pays to do a couple of things. Number one, really is to attract talent, i.e., you want to get talented individuals in Singapore, right? Or not even necessarily Singaporean citizens born in Singapore. We can also look at naturalized citizens from overseas, right, to take on all these key appointments in our government. That's the first justification. And the second one, which would inevitably receive a whole ton of scrutiny, would be, issues related to corruption. Because the idea is that ministerial pay is high in order to mitigate corruption as a whole. Okay? Simply put, if your pay is high, there will be less likelihood for you to be attracted to, all these under the table deals and all that. So obviously, when such cases occur, the optics aren't good, because people will start questioning them. Why are we paying somebody like Mr. Iswaran so much, right? That's fair, certainly, and this would inevitably become a sore point, right? And of course, if you have been following all the updates surrounding the ministerial pay itself, 2 years ago, right? 2 years ago. No, sorry, not 2 years ago. Last year. Okay. Last year, there was supposed to be a review of the ministerial pay itself, according to this article, right? And of course, this CNA article released in 9th of January, as you can see here, right? Mr. Chan Chun Sing, the MOE, he has said that the salary review would be deferred, right? Because of, according to this article, other pressing issues. So the context here is the ministerial pay was last reviewed in 2012, I believe. Oh no, sorry, 2018. And the pay was reduced, if I'm not wrong. Right? This article says so. And there was supposed to be a review last year to increase their salaries to match, all the rising costs of living, right? And of course, when such a case of corruption pops up, whether or not, of course, we want to have the good practice of, waiting for the verdict so that we don't persecute people before that, right? Innocent until proven guilty, obviously. So, nevertheless, though, it further touches on the wider sore point here, because if ministerial pay is going to go up, then it may come across as very, very insensitive, not just because of this corruption issue, but also, and that brings me to the next thing that's affecting the PAP optics at the moment, right? The issues related to costs of living. So obviously, right, there has been inflation of prices in the past couple of years due to, well, that's kind of understating it, but the inflation is due to a couple of things, right? Things that we cannot control. So, for instance, the Russia-Ukraine war, or the shipping lanes at near Yemen and the Houthi rebels and all that. Basically disruptions of the global supply chain that would lead to massive inflation of prices. COVID-19, right, was another huge thing, because we are still experiencing the COVID lag, even though life in the world as a whole is pretty much going back to normal, of course, with more heightened awareness of virulent diseases and all that. And those are the global shocks, right? But locally speaking, because of how much we dipped into the past reserves, i.e. the government coffers, and CNA has produced a series of videos on that, getting PM Lee himself to explain all these things. I'll recommend you check it out. Because of that, the government had to increase GST, right? Or for our international viewers, that's equivalent to VATs, value-added taxes, from 8 to 9%. So costs of living as a whole has been just going up and up and up and up, right? And that's just for things related to like daily necessities and all that. We haven't even touched on, big ticket items, right? Like housing, cars, so on and so forth. And some of the responses by the ruling party, especially when they hesitated to call whatever that's going on now a cost of living crisis, right? Setting aside the fact that, or rather setting aside the debates over the definitions of what's happening in Singapore right now vis-a-vis costs of living, like whether or not it's a crisis, we'll set that aside. What we are focusing on really is the optics of it. So the optics of it obviously wasn't good. A lot of Singaporeans were not really happy with those statements. And now you have, this whole thing that's going down, and of course, all the affairs that occurred last year, right, between the former Speaker of Parliament and an MP, and of course it wasn't just PAP. The opposition was involved as well. In their embroiled rather in their own scandal. But yeah, so the optics of this situation isn't good for the ruling party, right? And how then do we analyze this thing, I guess, in such a way that you can use it in your examples, in your essays, right? Well, the optics side of it, certainly you can do that. And of course, the main analysis here that we really want to hone in on is considering the actual roles of a government versus what has allegedly happened here. So the thing is that if it's a government's job to take care of the citizens, right? So we are talking about dealing with short-term needs, like let's say the current needs of Singaporean citizens when it comes to cost of living, and dealing with long-term needs, so long-term sustainability, economic development, healthcare needs, right? Technological advancements, things like that. The government is supposed to protect the citizens' interests, keep their interests at heart, and that is a driving philosophy of the PAP for many years, and I don't think that is likely to change. If it does, we are in deep trouble, but I don't think that's likely to change. And then you have their public servants doing things like that, which directly contradict what the philosophy of governance is and has been, ever since Lee Kuan Yew, rose to power in 1959. So this whole thing, let's just call it what it is really just a mess of a mess of political implications for the PAP, and it doesn't help for the PAP side of things that there is just this avalanche of crap that they have to deal with, to put it simply, I guess. And yeah, so the two main perspectives here, just to summarize, right? Basically the optics of Mr. Iswaran and Mr. Ong Beng Seng's actions, right? Alleged actions. And of course, using it as an example to prove that when politicians prioritize their own interests over the citizens' interests, you get negative externalities like these, right? Because let's unpack that further. What do I mean, by that? Because if let's say we consider for a moment, right, that somebody is being corrupt, okay, we can look at it from very simple terms. Mr. Ong Beng Seng himself, as a businessman, right, he would get access to, assuming, of course, it hasn't been proven yet, beyond a reasonable doubt, but assuming that he got a lot of, favors from Mr. Iswaran, favors, right? His business obviously would gain access to, higher paying contracts, more lucrative contracts. He'll get access to more information, especially those that are typically confidential and not widely available to many companies, even if they engage, all your big market research firms like why am I spacing on the name of that firm? It starts with an N, Nielsen, right? So on that front, yes, we can say that, but if we are talking about the negative externalities on the people themselves, right, we are talking about the business practices being corrupted at the same time. So the government has said this many times already. When it comes to cases of corruption, they will always nip it in the bud as much as possible and whenever it comes to light. And the reason for that is that if they do not maintain a clear and consistent message regarding, corruption, then or at least, a very clear and consistent message that, there is basically a zero tolerance policy, regarding all these things, then it may normalize corruption in the long term. Of course, you may argue that, hey, that's a little bit fallacious, it's a little bit of a slippery slope, but that can happen, right? It usually starts off with one thing. Just we have discussed the culture war before, right? So why is it that things are just so damn crazy right now? Because goalposts have been shifted over time, slowly but surely, and it's a very, very insidious process. So if we do not maintain our vigilance and corruption becomes normalized, I can guarantee you the lives of Singaporeans would just go downhill all the way. And that's because we are an economy that is highly globalized and connected to the global economy. And much of what influences a firm's decision to invest in a country is really the presence of corruption or lack thereof. In short, the more corruption there is, the less likely they will invest. When firms overseas, especially your large MNCs, do not invest in Singapore, right, then we are talking about opportunity costs in the form of job losses and all that. So that's the long-term view, right? And again, you may argue, yeah, this is just one case, but this is one case at the highest level of government. So obviously, like what our DPM, Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, said in a statement when this news broke last week, he essentially said, yeah, I'm somewhat paraphrasing him here, but paraphrasing what he said, but he said, yeah, zero tolerance, right? And so we gotta be constantly, conscious of all these things. So some lines of arguments that you can use to, for this example, right? Governments, what they do, okay, the optics matter, right? So so the optics of what government does matters, okay? Optics of what? Oh, hang on. That hasn't worked, has it? Optics of what? I'm sorry about this. The F button on my laptop is just not really working properly. So, optics of what governments do matter, because their actions and their policies can affect, oh gosh, right, morale in the society as a whole. And then of course those are the intangibles, right? Of course there are the tangibles as well, possible or potential negative externalities that may stem from such. Actions. And the last one, possibly, the importance of prevention, right? Or at the very least, if it has already occurred, the importance of intervention or immediate intervention in cases of serious breaches in the in the government's incorruptibility. Oops. Yeah. And also, to sort of repair their own image and get themselves ready for the next elections and all that. But yeah, so this story, again, as I said, is still unfolding. We'll see what occurs. I'll definitely, do a follow-up video to this whenever, the trials have wrapped up and whatever verdict that comes along. But at the moment, I think what we can do really is to, read more into this, right? CNA is a great source for a lot of this local coverage. And if you want, I guess, a foreign perspectives, you can go and read up, external wire news like Reuters and all that to follow this story. And yeah, again, it's just a mess of a whole thing, right? And we really don't want something like this to destabilize the country as a whole. I doubt it would, really, is a serious issue, but not to the point whereby it constitutes a crisis level. I mean, of course, for the PAP, it is a crisis because, hey, one of their cabinet ministers doing shenanigans and all that. Then what about the public's trust? So, yeah, that's it for this particular topic. If you're interested, to ask a question, right? We haven't really gotten a question since I think episode 2 or 3. I would love to hear your thoughts, and yeah, you can follow us on our socials and all that. And yeah, you know, that's it for this topic. And now that we are done with it, but staying on the topic of Singapore, right? We're gonna talk about something else that is also has been quite a mess this past week.